Welcome to the Pindown, your Detroit Pistons podcast. I'm your host, Wes Davenport from Motor City Hoops in Detroit Bad Boys.
And I'm Blake Silverman, writer for Detroit Bad Boys, covering everything from the Pistons to the NBA draft and the Motor City Cruise.
All right, Blake, before we really get diving in with all the talking points, all the things we can talk about this past week of Pistons basketball, I want to ask you, how's your heater?
Oh, man, it's good. I mean, hey, got it replaced, so that was a big hit to the checkbook, but things are going good. It's warm in my house, which is good because it is freezing outside. And I'm sure it's the same by you on the other side of the state.
Yeah, I was going to say it's in the nick of time. I believe it's 9 degrees out by where we are here in Grand Rapids at the,
We're at
the
like
moment.
20, so
Okay, so there you go. Yeah, that's a little better. And I'm sure I think you guys got snow, but maybe not as much as we did over on the west side of the state, but that's also how it usually goes.
Yeah. The furnace was actually like cooking through the weekend, which was good. And I was like, oh, maybe we don't even need to do anything. But then I'm sure it would have died out on us right in time for today and like these freezing cold. So all good.
You might say, Blake, that your new furnace is cooking as well as Ron Holland did against the Boston Celtics the other night.
Exactly. And the timing is right there too. But man, that was fun in a game that wasn't fun to watch. Watching Ron Holland like take over. And I think shout out to our guy Bobby Buckets, who he posted a highlight video, and I think the clips were from the NBA stats site, and they had I think they always do the home broadcast, so they had the Celtics announcers on there, and I enjoyed listening to like Scalabrini, and I think their play-by-play guy's name is Drew Carter. They were kind of just like laughing at one point because of everything that Ron Holland was doing. It was fun in an otherwise very disappointing and frustrating game to watch.
Yeah, agreed. Like we'll break down the rest of the game here in a minute, but I don't know. I think we could stick on Ron Holland just because it is the most recent fun, entertaining thing that happened in Pistons world. And we just talked about on the last episode, right? How he's kind of flashing this ability to score a little bit in the half court, to get his own bucket and be decisive attack. You saw all that. All that really came into that fourth quarter there where he went off for, I think it was 20 points, right?
Yeah.
Not to mention the jump shots starting to go in with a little bit more frequency, but like I kept saying last week, I think the fact that every now and then Ron Holland will just flash this ability to create a little bit of space and then attack through it to go get a bucket. He had the step back mid-range shot along the baseline. He had multiple kind of half court Euro step going across the lane finishes. That stuff's all bankable. It's all really exciting. If he can kind of package all that together, you've got a really exciting bag as a scorer.
Yeah, and what stood out to me, something similar that stood out to me as a positive with Jaden Ivey to start the year off. It just seems like when Ron Holland goes to the rim, he has just a ton of options of what he can go to, and just some super crafty finishes, which I mean, saw a little bit of it in the G League, but I wasn't expecting him to be, I guess, as creative, or sometimes it doesn't look pretty, but at certain points, like he had one against the Celtics where I was like, how did he get that one to drop? So I've enjoyed his finishing at the rim. It's still obviously a big work in progress overall with this whole game, but I thought it was super fun to watch. I mean, if he didn't pop off like that, I'm not really sure what we would be talking about otherwise, but it was nice to see Ron get all those scoring opportunities in like 11 for 14, and his only misses were from 3. He was 2 for 5 from 3. So just crazy efficient night, which was nice to see for him.
I'm glad you brought up Jaden Ivey in the context of Ron Holland's finishing, and I think we could lump Asar Thompson in with this too, because Jaden Ivey and Asar Thompson are both guys that when they came into the league, kind of the rep on them was that they struggled with touch, right? And that was kind of their issue around the rim. And we've seen that with Jaden Ivey. Some of his misses, the ball's just up there too hard. right? He doesn't have that soft touch that just allows the ball to kind of dance around the rim, fall in. You saw Asar Thompson against the Celtics blow a couple transition layups for the exact same reason. Just doesn't quite have that soft touch around the basket. Ron Holland does. He does actually have pretty good touch around the rim. His problem with finishing is more skill based. And I think that it's kind of interesting to see how those two things differ, right? You've got guys like Asar Thompson and Jaden Ivey who can get to the rim and who are getting themselves in the right position to take the right attempt, the right type of attempt around the basket more times than not. But then they just can't get it to finish because they don't have that kind of touch, the ability to pull off the speed a little bit and get it up there soft. Whereas Ron Holland, just when he gets there, sometimes he's not doing the right type of finish, or sometimes he's not getting all the way to the rim. But when he does, then you see the touch kind of come through. So I think it's good to point out, because the future potential, right? The ability of a player to eventually in the future become a really great finisher. It's usually a better bet if a guy already has good touch versus a guy who doesn't. And so I think this is going to be kind of fun to watch over the rest of the season and the next few years.
Yeah, I know you've mentioned, I mean, just the sheer it's been 26 games now, seeing what the flashes from Ron Holland. I wasn't expecting to see everything that he's shown this early. So yeah, it's just super nice to see him be able to make an impact. And I know the context of when he went off in the Celtics game, it wasn't exactly a competitive game or anything like that, but I think he's really, I guess, just forcing JB Bickerstaff to prioritize him. How does he choose to do that? I'm not really sure, but I think Ron has been able to make much more of an impact as a rookie than I was expecting him to do. So, like, I mean, especially in this draft when there's not like the runaway star and Zachary Risache is your number one pick, and he's drafted to be more or less a role player who can shoot the ball and defend. Like, if you get a guy who has the scoring upside that Ron Holland does, I think you have to be pretty happy with that. And even if it doesn't work out in the long run, that could be something that's like, okay, we gave it our best shot. But I think so far, like, the Pistons overall have to be thrilled with what he's shown, still just at a super young age.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to be. It's beyond my expectations as well. And since we've kind of pushed it off long enough, I think at this point, let's talk about the rest of that Celtics game. And then when we're done with that, we'll go back to that Knicks game too, the much more fun conversation where Cade went off with a pretty crazy triple-double. But let's get this one out of the way first, because I want to focus first on the bigs. So this was Jalen Duren. He missed the game. He had a wrist injury. Hopefully he'll be back soon. So this was really the Isaiah Stewart, Paul Reed game versus a team in the Celtics who have a couple of guys definitely over 7 feet tall that can shoot, can kind of do everything out there. What did you think of the bigs against the Celtics?
I thought it was interesting because I know a lot of the conversation in the Pistons world has been, should Jalen Duren come off the bench? Should Isaiah Stewart start? Is the answer just not on the team right now? Like, I mean, I thought it was interesting that we got a game where we did see Isaiah Stewart start in the context of just the normal starting lineup, just without Duren. And I mean, have to hope that Duren isn't out for a long time by any means. But I think what we saw with Isaiah Stewart in the starting lineup, I mean, I thought the Pistons overall defended pretty well off the gate, and then it kind of fell apart a little bit. And what YouTube user brings up in the chat about how Duren at center isn't going to fix all the Pistons defensive issues, and just the perimeter defenders need to get much better. I totally agree with that. I think, like, Cade has looked pretty good defensively. I mean, not like a staunch defender by any means, but I think we're getting more out of him defensively than we thought. But I still notice a few like getting lost in rotations. And I don't mean to pick on him by any means. It's just the whole group of guard. Like, you don't really have a backcourt that is going to be your standout point of attack defenders, and then it kind of puts your back line in a bad spot. And overall, like, Wes, not to steal your thunder or anything, but when we were talking before we jumped on about how Porzingis and Cornet like didn't necessarily kill the Pistons, I agree with that too. I think they, like, the Celtics bigs were able to make plays for their teammates as well. And yes, it was the Celtics. Yes, Peyton Pritchard went off. Like, Derek White made 7 threes. But I think overall, like, teams are just finding ways to pick apart the Pistons defensively. And then it's tough to dig out of that hole. I mean, the Pistons shot 7 for 37 from 3, so that didn't help you at all. But I thought overall, even though they came out of the game a little bit a slugfest, I felt like the defensive issues were still they still shone through in that game, even though Jalen Duren wasn't playing.
So it's interesting to me that you focused on the guards a little bit there, because I did too. I found myself when I was taking notes for that game, there were multiple possessions where Cade just chose not to close out, and actually that's been one of his strengths, I've thought, this year. It just got talked about on the Pistons Pulse. One of the things Cade's been very good at is his ability to close out and recover. That was non-existent against the Celtics. I thought Tim Hardaway Jr. was pretty rough. YouTube user mentions Tobias Harris. He was really rough, I thought, against the Celtics, actually on both ends, really. It was a tough night for him. Jaden Ivey really struggled to contain the Celtics guards. I mean, you could just go up and down the roster. I thought the perimeter defense was really rough. There wasn't a single player who was really immune to that. I thought Ron Holland had a few nice plays, defensively good hustle plays. Asar Thompson had one transition possession where he single-handedly took a 3-on-1 and forced the ball to be kind of stalled out until Fontecchio got back into the play and blocked an alley-oop attempt. So that was a great play by Asar. But even outside of that, I thought Holland and Asar, who are probably your two best perimeter defenders at this point, were pretty underwhelming. And so the comment here from YouTube user is, can Pistons fans finally understand simply replacing Duren at center isn't going to fix the Pistons' defensive issues? The perimeter players need to get a lot better in switch or drop. And so the reason I was also going to bring this comment up is that I think why it was so obvious that the issue against the Celtics was on the perimeter was because Isaiah Stewart was actually doing a pretty decent job once things got to him in front of the rim. He had a nice block against Kristaps Porzingis. I thought Stewart in particular was very effective on switches and in drop coverage. Paul Reed, Luke Cornett gave him fits. Luke Cornett wasn't just too bigging Paul Reed. Luke Cornett is a very good off-ball mover, and Paul Reed would lose him. But when things went towards Paul Reed, he was effective. So when he was able to see it coming at him, he made a couple of really decent defensive plays. I think he had a block. Let me look. Yeah, Paul Reed had a block and 2 steals. Like, Paul Reed had a halfway decent defensive night outside of just completely losing Cornett numerous times during the game, which you can't really accept that. That's bad. But my point is, the Pistons actually had competent backline defense, and so it became extremely obvious all of the issues they have on the perimeter, which I found very interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's just like if you plug one hole, another's opening up, and yeah, I don't know. I'm hoping it was just an off night. If it was an off night, that's pretty disappointing in and of itself, because you had all that time to regroup and almost like a mini break, which you have again with the NBA Cup play going on. So yeah, and obviously the opponent is probably one of the toughest matchups that you're going to see, but I think it was very much like, these are the issues that this team has, and how do you fix them? Because like you mentioned, if Duren's out and Stewart's in, like, yeah, we have that benefit there, but then there's all these other issues that are going on that are still already there. So I think it's just shining through that like this roster isn't really built to compete at a level that is going to beat a majority of NBA teams on most nights. And I think that might be what it is right now. It's definitely disappointing as a fan after like all these years and everything. But once Trajan came in, he was upfront that it's going to take some time. And I think like, I don't know what the moves are that potentially will or won't be made this season, but I think overall it's just it's more of like the long game, which is tough because they have played better and we have seen a lot more wins and they're outperforming their pace that a majority of people would be at. But I think overall it's just glaring that the roster needs improvements in certain areas and those aren't going to happen overnight.
It makes it all the more impressive that they started the season for the first month and a half as a top 15 defensive team. I mean, we were talking about how surprised we were just when you look at this roster that they were having that level of success. Now it kind of seems like the walls are kind of crumbling down on that. But look, I think the point that's worth bringing up here is that the Pistons roster has problems defensively at every single level, at the guards, on the at the wing, on the perimeter, and then at the bigs, at least when Jalen Duren is your starting center. So when you plug up one hole, the others are still there. So directly to YouTube users' point, like none of this is to say that the entirety of the Pistons' defensive problems is perimeter defense. That's half of it. The other half's the back line. So it's unfortunate that in a game where I actually thought the Pistons' backline defense played pretty well. I thought that the help defense from Stewart and Paul Reed, and in a couple instances of Sar Thompson, was actually rather good. But it's coming against the Celtics, who have Derek White, who's going to put 7 threes down on you, and Peyton Pritchard's going to go off for 27 points in 20 minutes. He did not play a crazy
31
amount of minutes. 31. Oh, okay, so he played more than I thought. Peyton Pritchard,
I think he was still in
minutes,
there with
almost a point a minute.
Their reserves at the end.
Yeah, exactly. So, of course, this is the game where that's going to happen. But look, my point is that it's not worth pursuing fixes to the back line because you have these other issues. When you have a roster where everything kind of needs to be fixed on defense, fixing one thing is still a good idea, if that makes sense. So, yeah, it's all still going to be a problem, and it's not a complete fix, but one player isn't a complete fix. And that's kind of what makes this such a puzzle, I guess, for Langdon over the next season, 2 seasons.
Right. And it's just like, what are you going to prioritize in your future moves? I remember talking about heading into the season, like it seemed like the team was built for trying to win games offensively, and your main acquisitions, like you brought in to help with the floor spacing issue that we all were talking about for the past few seasons or however long it's been. So you've seen that helped, like it's helped in a certain area, but you have this other area that needs improvement. I guess I'm wondering if it's like a pick your poison kind of thing, because you only have so much money to spend. What kind of players are you going to give it to? But yeah, overall, you need to do something to just help the guys out defensively. I'm not really sure what that is exactly. Like, I think there's a number of things you can do at every position level. But overall, it just seems like until changes are made, like roster wise, I think these issues will just continue. And not like it's crazy. It's disappointing for sure and frustrating to watch, but I think it almost is what it is, just where the state of this team is right now.
Laz Jackson, also DBB guy, he had a great tweet. I think it was yesterday, might have been this morning. But he essentially said part of what makes those crazy wins against really good teams, or the 3-0 and the NBA Cup tournament play, like preseason stuff, and all the game against the Knicks that we're about to talk about here. what makes all of those so special and so fun is the fact that they also lay these eggs against the Celtics. That they also just get blown out and give up like 300 points against the Milwaukee Bucks in the fourth tournament game. Like the fact that they are still a bad team that needs talent, needs to mature, needs to improve, makes the fun wins all the more fun. And that's kind of what this season is supposed to be. We know that they're not the best team in the league. We know that they're kind of borderline on if maybe they could even get towards or get close to being in the play-in conversation. But that's what makes those wins more fun. You got to have some of the pain to enjoy the fun, I think. And so I thought that was a good point by Les.
Yeah, and you're outpacing like what majority of people thought, and you're definitely outpacing the disaster of last season. Like you're already almost there to how many wins you got last season. And I think to a degree, like it's not like the players play is like doing anything to help with this, but like I think Langdon probably wants to at least have one more crack at the draft. Like he has Ron Holland in there, who's his guy that he picks, that he believed in, and is going to develop under this system. But I think there's also like maybe Ron Holland's the secondary scorer that of the future next to Cade, but maybe there's someone else in the draft that you can go after, like a secondary guard who can help take some of the creation responsibilities off of Cade and can also like pop for 25 on any given night. Like I think that too. And it's not like, I'm not saying the Pistons are trying to tank by any means, but I think just where the team is, like there's a lot of improvements that need to be made. And I think where they are at this point of the season is above expectations, but how the past couple of weeks have went, we're just all a little bit like, oh God, what are we in for the rest of the way? Which I think is very fair.
So on the fun side of things, let's talk about that Knicks game really quickly, because let me just read off what they beat. Okay, this was a 120-111 victory for the Detroit Pistons. They allowed 31 points, 10 assists, and 4 rebounds to Jalen Brunson. He shot better than 50% from the floor. They allowed 20 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals, and a block out of McCall Bridges, who also shot just about 50% from the floor. Josh Hart had 17.6 rebounds, 3 assists, and was 7 of 11 from the floor. And OG Anunoby was extremely impactful as a defender. Not only does he score 17 points, but 4 steals, 2 blocks on 6 of 15 shooting. The Pistons beat that on the back of a pretty incredible Cade Cunningham triple-double. He had 29 points, 10 rebounds, 5 assists. Was this the best Cade Cunningham game we've seen so far?
I think so. Like I'm trying not to get my recency bias in the way by any means, but I just think like a performance like that against that team, like yes, Karl Anthony Towns wasn't playing, but you're going into New York, and I saw the like it was the first Pistons triple double at Madison Square Garden, and it wasn't like, I mean, Cade, like having 15 assists and 29 points in a triple double is so just bonkers, really. And
3 turnovers, just 3 turnovers.
Right. And like outside of Cade, Malik Beasley had a great night, 7 for 10 from 3. But other than that, like there wasn't a ton going on offensively. And like for Cade to still be able to find ways to make all those plays, I thought was just super impressive. And I mean, yeah, I thought he's had a number of performances this season alone that you can look at and be like, okay, yeah, this is this guy's all-star performance. Like he deserves a reserve all-star spot. But I think now if you like look back on it, like that's the game you can look back on. The Pistons go into New York, a very good team that they've struggled with a ton. And he does that when Jalen Brunson scores 31 points and has 10 assists, and 3 other Knicks have 17 points or more. Like I just think that performance was so crazy, and he like willed them to that win, 100%. Like a ton of credit to Malik Beasley as well, but like that was the Cade Cunningham game, I felt like.
Well, he absolutely willed them to the win. Like, there's a little bit of conversation in the live chat right now talking about the Pistons defense, the perimeter defense being better against the Knicks. Like, no, it was not. I don't think it was. Jalen Brunson went off. Josh Hart went off. Anunoby had a great game. So did McCall Bridges. They had decent minutes off the bench from let's see who Miles McBride had a nice game, I thought. Like that. Now the Knicks weren't making the open 3-point shots they had, so we'll give them that, right? There's a little bit of luck involved there, but I think it just makes it all the more impressive that the perimeter defense was struggling. Jaden Ivey had 6 turnovers on the night, and yet anytime the Knicks pulled in close, Cade Cunningham just pushed him back away, right? He had an important stretch late in that third quarter where he pushed the Knicks back away. The Knicks actually won the third quarter 27-20. And Cade Cunningham was the big reason why the Pistons, I believe, still went into the fourth quarter with the lead. This was a fantastic game out of him, and I agree. Best game I think he's played. 7 free throw attempts, made 6. He had 2 offensive rebounds. Like it was an incredible game. That was an incredible game.
Yeah, and the Pistons shot 50% from 3 as a team, but that was pretty much like if you just take Cade and Beasley, like they were at 65% on like 18 attempts. Like they were the guys that were putting the shots up. So yeah, I just thought it was not, I mean, tougher game for Jaden Ivey. He had a nice spurt though towards the end. But yeah, like Cade was just insane during that game, and I was happy to see it out of him. And just again, like 15 assists, 29-point triple-double is like in Madison Square Garden is just crazy.
Last point here before we go on and get to some of these questions that we've got, but I wanted to ask you about Jaden Ivey, what you've thought out of him. I think this has been a rough, maybe 2.5, 3 weeks or so for him. He started off the season really strong, and it feels a little bit like he's coming back down to earth. What have you seen out of him, and maybe how can he get himself out of this little rut that he's in?
Yeah, it's odd because I think he's always been very, very streaky, but I don't know, you just don't want these stretches to go on as long as it has. Like I'm looking at his past 5 games, and the best one probably was the one against the Knicks where he was pretty quiet the majority of the game and then just had a nice stretch towards the end, but he also had 6 turnovers in that game. So not a great performance there either. It's tough. Like I saw some stuff online on should Ivy fully run the second unit? Should like JB Bickerstaff set the rotation so like Cade and Ivy come in and out together? So I don't know. I just think sometimes it might be harder to get Ivy going, and when the shot isn't falling, it's just like tough to find his way out of it. I think one of the big signs or like improvements we've seen is the 3 ball from him, and there were a couple games over the past 5 where he only got 3 attempts up. They haven't been falling at a crazy rate, except he had 1 3 for 8 games. So I don't know. I'm in a tough spot with this. I mean, right now I feel like you sort of just ride it out and see what happens and hope it doesn't go as long, because it's just, there's no other way around it. It's been a tough couple weeks for Jaden Ivey, and always been a bit streaky, but I think that's just the way of the road.
Yeah, and look, I think that the question to him coming off the bench, and well, not coming off the bench, but leading the bench unit as the primary point guard, I'm not as worried about it. I think he's been fine outside of some of the high turnover games, but that 6 turnover game was let's see, the games before that, it was 3-2, 1-3. He had one other game where it was up at 7, but again, 3-2, 3-0, 3-2. Like, he's not really been a high turnover guy. It's kind of been right about where you'd expect it to be for a secondary playmaker. What's worrying me the most is I think he's settling a lot. You brought up the 3-point attempts. I think he's probably taking a little bit too many 3-point attempts, especially against Boston. He was up at 9. Like, I don't really want to see Jaden Ivey over 5 or 6 on any given night. And it just feels like he's going to that floater a little bit more than he ever used to. It feels like he's going to that like step back pull up there from the mid range more than he used to. His free throw attempts have dropped down. The last time he was up over 6 was on November 25th.
Toronto.
Yeah, against Toronto. Like, he's just been less aggressive getting his shot at the rim to me. And I think that's going to be a huge problem. That's his whole game. That's his whole pitch, so to speak, as a scorer, is that you can't stop him from getting to the hoop. And if he gets to the hoop, he's going to get to the line a decent amount. Right. So I think, to me, like, he's just got to put his head down a little bit more.
Yeah, and I mean, when you are having a tough stretch, like that's how you get out of it. Like, try to hunt those shots and not try to force mid-rangers or threes. So yeah, I'm with you. I hope it overall he tries to find some looks at the rim a little bit more than we've seen as of recent, because like I said earlier, when at the start of the season, I thought he was doing very well, and that stuck out as something that made a bigger jump overall. So I hope we see him get back to it. It's just, yeah, it's been tough overall. Like, he had a good game in that Pacers, the NBA Cup game, but other than that, it's been a difficult stretch for sure.
And so El Blusa says he's surprised that Ivy isn't driving as often with the aggressiveness we saw in the preseason and the early part of the year. I agree. And I just add to this that, like, look, if this is a problem where Ivy's seeing a lot more attention towards him, because it might be, right? It might be the case that when Ivy puts his head down and starts going to the rim, that their defenses are just sending more help his way. I would much rather, though, in that situation, him go to the kick out rather than go to the floater or go to the mid-range pull-up jump shot. Like, if with Jaden Ivey, unless it's a really easy floater, easy for him would be a couple steps under the free throw line and probably with only one defender in front of him. It's just something he's going to as a counter rather than going up in traffic with it. If it's not that kind of situation, then just kick it out. Make the easy pass and just kick it out. Punish the defense for sending the extra help defender off the corner or off the wing. And they're going to stop doing it because the Pistons now have the shooters, right? If that's Malik Beasley out there that they just left, let Malik Beasley punish the help, not Jaden Ivey with a mid-range pull-up. So, like, this might just be some of this young guard decision-making thing that he really didn't have the opportunity to do so much last season. So maybe this is just growing pains, but it is really noticeable to me. I think it really stands out, and hopefully he can fix it. Hopefully he can adjust.
Especially in a game like against Boston where Cade Cunningham was getting so much defensive pressure. Like, that's a game for Ivy to go and get his. And I mean, he had a lot of opportunities. Like, he took 14 shots, 9 of those were from 3, like you mentioned. It just wasn't falling. So I hope as like other teams see this and are targeting Cade more and more, and maybe taking some taking some pressure off Ivy based on what how he's played recently. Like, I hope he can just find a night to get back on track.
Yeah, me too. So let's dive into some of the questions here that we got. This one is from Bobby Buckets. We also have a follow-up on this one from KCP for 3, and it's through. But we'll go to this one first. Do you expect Detroit to be buyers or sellers at the trade deadline?
It's so tough because I think if you're a buyer, you have to be buying for long term, and by long term, I guess I mean just more than someone that's going to help you this season. Like, you're not bringing in a player to make a push for the play-in or whatever it might be. But I don't think the Pistons would go and trade for a big money guy that's on and expiring, and like a la Brandon Ingram, unless you were ready to commit to him for the long term. I think the much safer route, if you have a player that you believe in, is trading for someone that at least has another season, hopefully two, on their deal that isn't going to pigeonhole you. I mean, that's really, really tough because a lot of the players that you're going to go for are going to be making a lot of money. So you have to find ways to make it work, and it has to be players that you're comfortable keeping on your books, or you're super sure that you can give up on or trade again. All that said, I feel like I just don't really see them doing like, I feel like if I had to pick one of these answers, I would say I lean more towards sellers. Like, and by that I mean I don't think they're gonna give up the ship, but I could see them parting with one of their young pieces, a rotational player, if it's going to net you some sort of draft compensation or an interesting young piece or someone that's going to help out the rotation. Um, I don't know. Maybe there's like a bigger move that I'm not seeing. I just don't see, like, I just don't think it makes sense right now where this team is at. So because of that, I feel like if they were going to be anything, they would have to be sellers.
I think I agree. And I'm with you. I think maybe one veteran, one young guy, something like that might be on the table to try to acquire maybe some additional second round picks, or maybe another veteran that fits just a little bit better, right? And is under contract for another season. But I guess the only counter argument to this, right? The devil's advocate argument would be, if you think Cade Cunningham is ready. Like, if you think that
Yeah.
Cade Cunningham right now, you could put a team around him with enough talent that next season, or maybe just the season after, they can not just make the play-in, but be in contention for a top 6 seed if you kind of adjust the pieces in the right way. If you think that that's on the table, if you're Charles Langdon and that's on the table, then maybe it does make sense to go get a guy like Brandon Ingram if you think that's a good fit. Make a move to bring in a guy that can be that other star with Cade and can help lift the roster up from there. Now, I don't know if I'm in that boat. I don't know if that's what I'm seeing right now, where they're not one piece away, two pieces away. Realistically, they are probably 4 starters away from being at that level. So maybe you think that you can do that, though, right? Maybe you think you get Cade and Brandon Ingram, or Cade and Zach LaVine, and you can, in free agency, grab a guy like Miles Turner, and then you're going to trust Ron Holland to take a step, and you still feel confident Tobias Harris. Like, okay, maybe that could work. That's just taking a lot of gamble. I don't know if I'd really want to jump onto that right now. Maybe next year, maybe next year's deadline, it would be a better idea to do that.
So you're thinking, if like the thing that went to my mind when you said if Cade is ready is like sort of what the Pacers did when they traded for Pascal Siakam.
Or like what the Mavericks did way back when they first got Luka, right? And they made the move for KP. Like, we got the guy, he's ready. We don't even need to answer any more questions. We're just going all in on him. Then maybe it makes sense.
Yeah, it's just such like an interesting, I guess, middle or fork in the road where you have to make a decision, because I'm also looking at like Isaiah Stewart, who he's in year 5, and honestly, to me, like on this roster going down, I feel like he's one of the pieces that other teams that are looking for help down the stretch like will value the most. So it's like, does Trajan Langdon want to get as much value as he can out of a player like Isaiah Stewart, or does he, like, I don't know if anyone would take on Tim Hardaway Jr.'s expiring, but does he want to see if a team would take a chance on Simone Fontecchio and send you back like probably a nothing pick essentially. Like what what are what are you valuing more, I guess? Like acquiring additional assets, which is what Langdon has talked so much about, or like do you believe in these players that you have in house, like to not make those moves? I think there might be like a surprising trade that we'll see this season at some point. Just in terms of like maybe it is Isaiah Stewart who gets dealt just because he has that value on the market. But I don't know. I think there's a bunch of different ways that you can go. But personally, I feel like at right now, I'd be surprised if the Pistons made a trade for like a bigger name guy, unless it was like getting Zach LaVine or Nikola Vucevic for like not sending much out in return. If like the Bulls would do that.
So this is the follow-up question here from KCP for 3, but he says, what type of player should they buy if they do end up being buyers in the market? So you mentioned Zach LaVine, Nikola Vucevic. We talked a little bit about Brandon Ingram. Are any of those 3 guys that you actually could make an argument for really making a good run at? Is there anyone else that you think maybe they could add to that list? Who should they be buyers for if they're going to do it?
Yeah, I mean, of the names we've already talked about, like personally, I think I would be most interested in Vucevic just because like he doesn't have that much longer left on his deal. It's fairly inexpensive. He gives you something on this team that you don't have already. But that said, I like wouldn't want to give up something real to go out and get him. And yeah, Zach LaVine is interesting because he's on a much bigger contract. He has a couple more years. I think Chicago would at least want some sort of player and draft capital in return, and then you have to make the money work. So I just don't know if there's a deal there. It's so tough because I want them to get a good, like someone who's going to help out defensively, but I'm just not really seeing those names on the market right now. So like Anthony Simons is one, and I'm like, that's I could kind of take that or leave it at this point. So I think overall I'm kind of just in the wait and see. Like I don't think any of those guys would necessarily move me with this roster unless they like really thought that Brandon Ingram was the piece that they needed or something like that.
Yeah, look, I think if you make an argument for one of those guys to give up real assets for, I kind of think it would have to be Brandon Ingram. Like of those 3, I guess, like my preference of who to target. And I suppose the argument for Brandon Ingram would be, look, he's 27. That's winning time, right? He's never had a real defined role in New Orleans. It's kind of pendulum back and forth. A lot of times he's been asked to play off guys like Zion. Other times he's been asked to be that like stud wing who you just give the ball to and he does everything that he wants and just goes and gets buckets. It's swung. It's never been really defined. So maybe you think, hey, not only is he at a point in his career where he wants to do whatever he can to win games, but we can also get him in a system where his job is going to be take what Cade Cunningham gives you, be elite as a play finisher and as a guy that once Cade slants the floor, now you attack. And then also a lot of minutes with the bench unit where you are kind of that go-to, do whatever the heck you want sort of scorer with bench units. Like I would get that. And if on top of it too, you think, hey, maybe Ron Holland is going to be ready next year. So that's our starting 2. We can throw him out on the best perimeter player for the other team. And maybe we do invest in a guy like Miles Turner, who YouTube user brings up only makes sense as a free agent. Absolutely correct. You cannot extend Miles Turner. He's going into free agency no matter what. But like there are so many ifs in everything that I just said right there, where like Brandon Ingram would have to change his DNA a little bit to fit in Detroit. Otherwise, I do think he's a little bit too ball dominant and a little too black hole like on offense, and he's not a great defender. So I guess Trajan Langdon would know, right? Langdon would know better than anyone if Brandon Ingram's a guy that can make those adjustments, would be willing to make those adjustments, and if it would work out in Detroit. He's only 27, so I don't want to write it off. He's still got time. He's going to be a good player for another probably 5, 6, 7 years with his play style. It's just, will he? I have no idea.
Yeah. Yeah, the thing with Ingram for me is like YouTube user brought it up in the chat. Brandon Ingram doesn't make sense to him because he believes if the only way he resigns with the Pistons is for a max. Like, I'm with that, and that's like a lot of money in a lot of years. You have to be completely sure on, and I'm not
It's
sure.
capped out in the 50s though.
Yeah,
It's not like Karl Anthony Towns super duper massive contract. He would get a lot.
yeah,
It just wouldn't be. It'd be more. I think it's mid 50s. I think it's at like 55 or 56.
yeah.
The way the cap's going, it's really not bad.
Yeah, I mean the cap's going up and everything. So like, I mean, honestly, I think it is more of like, do you want to commit to this player for 5 years? But it's like, okay, at what point are you going to make a decision? And I think it's tough to like put that on Trajan Langdon because he's only been in charge for this offseason and 26 games. So yeah, I don't know. I would be a little like weary in giving a max to a Brandon Ingram right now. And I mean, honestly, I don't think the Pistons would do it probably. But if you like take that off the board, I'd love to bring him in, and maybe you can get him for not as much as you think. I mean, I honestly assume that New Orleans would want Isaiah Stewart because they were said that they were interested in him last year, but that was when Langdon was in New Orleans. So maybe Langdon wants to keep Isaiah Stewart. So there's a lot that's going into it, but I don't know. I just don't think that they're gonna get one of like the bigger names on the market.
Yeah, I agree. I don't really think there's a great pairing there. I wouldn't.
And
want
they don't
give
need
them a
to.
max.
Like,
yeah,
right
they don't
now.
need to. They don't need to. They've still got a little bit of time. So I think I'll throw one name out. Guy that I don't know if this even qualifies as a buy because he's a vet and he's on a short-term deal and he's pretty cheap. But Jonas Valanciunas would be an upgrade at the 5 spot. He really would. And hey, Washington's got Troy Weaver. If there's anyone that wants to take a shot on a guy like maybe Jalen Duren, maybe.
Oh yeah,
maybe.
that's true. But then I was kind of like, oh man, maybe he's Troy Weaver's just hanging up any calls he gets from Detroit, but he's not the lead decision maker. So yeah, I'd like that too. I mean, when I saw the deal that Valanciunas signed with Washington, I was kind of like, why aren't the Pistons doing that? And it was a clear like, this player is probably going to get traded. And I'm sure that there will be contenders that want him as well. But yeah, I'd really like that as well. I mean, he is a great rebounder, plays defense, and he has random nights where he's like on fire from 3, which is very strange. But yeah, that was one name I wanted the Pistons to get in free agency this past offseason.
He's after this season, he's got 2 more years on his deal. The average value
10 a
is
year,
just over
right?
10. Yep, just over 10. Like, he's only 32 right now. He'll be 33 next year. He'd be solid defensively. He'll block some shots. He's a good veteran player. Like you said, he can shoot it a little bit, good hands. I like Valanciunas a lot. And honestly, that's the exact kind of big, powerful veteran big who's a good defender that would really help this team quite a bit right now. If you could get him for minimal capital, I'd be interested. I'd have to think that the Wizards would be interested in maybe one of the Pistons' less favored young guys. If the Pistons do want to move on from a guy like Duren, Washington is hungry for young talent. They'd take a swing on something like that. I could see that being a fit.
Yeah, I have a question. Would you be interested in like a point guard, like a bench point guard, or just like a
Brogdon?
second? I actually have like a more that like that could be one, but a little deeper cut. I think I've liked Vasily Micic from Charlotte.
Oh,
And
sure.
he's like, I think it's just his second year in the NBA, but he's older because he's spent a lot of time overseas. And I mean, LaMelo is hurt a lot, but when LaMelo's available, his role kind of diminishes. And I feel like you could potentially get him for not that much if you do want to bring in a ball handler, playmaker, like someone like that would be interesting. Like it's kind of similar to the Fontecchio move that was made
Yeah, a little
last
bit.
year. Um, so yeah, just another name as I'm scrolling through just potential trade targets that stuck out to me.
That would kind of depend on what you do with maybe a guy like Malik Beasley, right? Like if you want to if you're going to move on from Beasley, you want someone else on a different contract. I think he's got Micic has another year on his deal, doesn't he?
I believe so. Yeah. Um, Yep. He has
Okay,
a
yeah.
he has a team option for next season, so
There you go.
you
Yeah.
could
Well,
wash
so
your hands.
that'd be the move you make where you say, okay, we're moving on for Beasley because we're going to get some draft capital for him. A contending team's going to give us a late first, something like that, and then you go, okay, we've definitively learned that Jaden Ivey can't be the backup point guard, so we're going to get a guy like this. And I think
Mhm.
if that's where you're at in February, I think that would make a lot of sense. And I don't know. What do you think? Do you think getting to the trade deadline is enough sample size to make a definitive call on a guy like Jaden Ivey in that role?
It's so tough because you wanna be sold on what you wanna do. Like, you wanna be sold on the decision that you have to make in this upcoming summer. And I don't know. Like, I think personally on Ivy, I'd want the more time. Like, I'd want to go in and work on an extension, whether it's less. Like, I know we've talked about the Jalen Green contract a bunch, like something like that. Hopefully, a little bit less, depending on how Ivy plays the rest of the year and how it plays out. But I mean, yeah, if it like I think if any of like Ivy or Dern get traded at the deadline, it's just like you're pretty much sold on it not working out for the future.
I'm with you on wanting more time with Jaden Ivey. I think, as much as it's been a little bit streaky, a little bit of a roller coaster this year, the highs have come more often than they have in the past. And it is noted he has improved. He's definitely improved. He's shooting it better with more consistency than he had in the previous couple of seasons. I think as a playmaker, he's making the right reads more consistently. That's been fantastic, and he's made a lot of strides as an on-ball defender. In at least in my view, he's not getting stuck on screens as often. So, look, I think with all of that, it would be great if they could keep Jaden Ivey around, not just next season, but into the
Mhm.
seasons after that. Like that's a successful draft pick. How successful it is just depends on if Jaden Ivey can make those highs consistent, right? Consistent things that you can expect every night instead of peaks and valleys and going everywhere, every which way from there. Let's get to this voicemail here. Another trade question. I guess it's trade season. We're coming up on that here in December. So this is another one of those.
My question is, would a package of Isaiah Stewart and Jaden Ivey have any value around the league? And would that be enough to pry that 7-footer away from Oklahoma City? Santi? That's my question this evening.
All right, Blake. So I believe the 7-footer that our caller is talking about is Santi Aldama from the Memphis Grizzlies. I couldn't find one with a name similar sounding to that on the Thunder. So I'll just read off Aldama's stats really quickly. But he's 6'11", 7 feet, somewhere in there. But 13 points, 7.5 rebounds, 3 assists, only 1.4 stocks per game, but he is shooting 37, almost 38% from three.
Yeah, I mean, I think the specific trade package is too much. So, but I don't know. Maybe Aldama is like, I thought he looked great in like FIBA play in the Olympics this summer, and if he did get a different situation, like maybe he could break out, and he definitely does add something to the Pistons that they don't have. But yeah, I don't think that particular packet, like one, I think it's too much for the Pistons to give up. And then two, yeah, YouTube user mentions, I don't know if the Grizzlies would really want to do that. So yeah, this one particularly, I think is too much for me, but it would just have to be if Trajan Langdon wants to get that value out of Isaiah Stewart, because I'm sure he's immensely valuable on the league. And then there's another team that wants to commit to Jaden Ivey, and the Pistons aren't ready to do that. So they give you some capital to make that deal. But I don't know. I just don't think that this one is really that close, I guess. So maybe there's something that you can do, but I think it would just be like one player and a draft pick or two. But yeah, overall, I think that would be way too much for the Pistons to give up here.
I agree. So I'll look at the first half of that question, just looking at the trade package in particular. Maybe this is a hot take. You let me know. I think that's probably the best 2-player trade package that the Pistons can put together. That does not include Cade Cunningham. Isaiah Stewart's a guy that we know is coveted around the league. He's on a fantastic contract. That deal looks awesome and continues to look more awesome, I think, as the years are going to go on. And then Jaden Ivey is a young guard who's shown a ton of potential as a scorer, who is showing a little bit of chops as a secondary playmaker, maybe as a bench point guard too. And the real kicker is that he's not played so well on his rookie deal that you'd be forced into giving him a post-rookie max extension. So you could probably get him on a solid deal if you're going to extend him this offseason, if you make a move to add him to your roster. Those two guys, again, if we're not throwing in draft capital, we're not throwing in Cade, because why on earth would we do that? I think that's the best 2-player package that the Pistons have. I can't imagine a team that wouldn't want those two guys right now. Makes me want to keep them, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's a good point, especially with Ivy's contract situation and potentially getting him to commit to a value deal. I think that, Asar and probably Ron Holland have more value on the trade market right now, but I don't think that those are names that the Pistons are necessarily like willing to give up right now anyway. So like, of those names that could realistically be traded, I think I agree with you on that. But if there was, like, say the Pistons were making a blockbuster to bring in a secondary star, and like, I could see the other team wanting Ron Holland included in the deal before like Jaden Ivey, for example, just to throw something out there.
No, I can see that. That's a good point. Let's end here with this one. This one is just up your alley, Blake, because I haven't done a ton of looking at this upcoming draft. Look, it's too early. The Pistons have 10 wins, and I just don't want to look at the draft yet. I'm having fun watching these guys so far this year, even though it's been, like we've been saying, a bit of a roller coaster. But MimC313 says, who are we drafting with the 5th pick in this year's draft?
Oh my gosh. Hey, that's assuming like we have top 4 odds and we fall to the 5th pick, right? Like, what if the Pistons pick this year is protected through like the lottery, I think, right?
I believe.
Okay. So yeah, maybe they end up towards, like, right now, based on record, they're 8th. So maybe they're somewhere in the 6 to 10 range and we get away from the infamous 5th pick. But right now, I'm just especially if they're top 5, I'm thinking they want to try to draft someone that you could think could be a secondary scorer and can handle the ball. Dylan Harper probably won't be there at 5, but he's a great name and like fun player to watch. And I've seen a lot of people compare him to Cade Cunningham, which is interesting. And then there's Trey Johnson in Texas, who like packs a huge scoring punch that I'd like. I think he could help the Pistons out. One name, and there's a bunch of others that I won't get into, but one player that I really like is Ben Seraph, or I'm trying to figure out so hard if it's Seraph or Saraf. He's from Israel and he's playing with Ratio Farm Ulm, so same place as Killian Hayes. Not to bring that up, but he's like a 6'5" point guard, has size. He is a really creative passer and can handle the ball well. The shot is here or there, but overall, I just think like he could be one of the best playmakers in the draft, and I think that would be something good for the Pistons to add. And he's got some buzz like heading into the season, and as the college season keeps going, I think the international players will cool off a little bit or just be less noise around him. But even if the Pistons end up in like the 8 to 10 range, like that would be a guy I would be looking at. But we're super early right now. I mean, we can have the center discussion too. I don't know if I'd be comfortable with any of these centers where the Pistons are drafting, but yeah, a lot of time left, a lot of places we could go, but a lot of fun players out there in next year's draft class.
So I think the listeners who have been sending in the questions this week, looking at trade deadline, looking at the draft here in the offseason, maybe they're onto some. We were saying maybe it was a bit too early. But breaking news, this is not a Pistons breaking news, but breaking news is that the Miami Heat get Thomas Bryant over to the Indiana Pacers for just a future swap of a second-round pick. So as YouTube user says here, essentially nothing. It's trade season. There you go. It's officially.
It's not even December 15th yet. I feel like it's so rare to see a trade before then.
Yeah. Yep. And so center's our second round pick.
Yeah.
So hey,
exactly.
Valanciunas might be cheap. There you go.
Yeah, that's interesting. And yeah, December 15th is Sunday when a lot of those trade restrictions go away. So maybe we'll see stuff, but yeah, I just quickly went to look at Sham's tweet, and I saw you mention that the Pacers were looking for center depth after they signed James Wiseman, and he tore his Achilles, unfortunately, in the first game, which was super bummer. Like I remember I sent in a
and then
group
Jackson too for them, right?
Yeah, I remember watching that game, and I was just like, hey, I think I'm back in on James Wiseman, and then he tore his Achilles like a minute later, which I was super bummed about. But
yeah, that was a rough start to the year.
yeah,
Because then the Pistons still lost the game too. So
yeah, with that Halliburton game winner.
Yep.
But
oh man, what's going on with Hallie too? Jeez.
Yeah, that's rough overall. I haven't caught the Pacers last few games since they played the Pistons, but I remember the comments where Hallie was in the locker room and he just seems so dejected. I mean, I hope it gets better, but I guess not too much better because they're in the Pistons division. So
well, this year I don't really care.
Yeah.
Hopefully he gets it back on track because he's a fun player to watch when everything's going well. But
Yeah.
we've devolved into NBA talk. This is a Pistons podcast.
Hey,
I think we got to shut it
there
down.
was a live trade, so you got to do it.
You got to. Yeah, you have to. But I think we got to shut it down there. Any final thoughts, Blake, before we close it out?
No, all good. I mean, this week with the NBA Cup has been like a mini break, and yeah, a frustrating couple weeks. So I think the few days off we have between the Celtics game and when the Pistons are back playing the Heat next week, I think it's good to take a step back. Good for the players to, I know JB said, clean up a bunch of stuff, but yeah, I'm excited to take a little bit of breathing room and then be right back at it next week.
And
You
the
got
Heat
any?
should be vulnerable. They just lost Thomas Bryant.
Oh man! And on that note, I will close us out. Shout out to everyone who joined us live, and shout out to our anonymous caller who left a voicemail question. We appreciate you. Reminder: anyone can call our number to ask a question, hear your voice on the show. The number for that is 313-355-2717. Special thanks to Sean Corp, the managing editor of Detroit Bad Boys, for supporting the show. And shout out to you guys for the great questions and talking points tonight. We'll catch you next week, whether on your commute or live with us on YouTube. We can't wait to talk more Detroit basketball with you all.